In this video, we'll be discussing how we use prisms to map the suppression scotoma. So we map the suppression scotoma as a preoperative assessment, and it provides us an indication of the likelihood of postoperative diplopia. If a patient has had strabismus surgery in the past, it can also give us an indication of the previous strabismus. We can measure or map the suppression scotoma using the Synopter-4 or prisms, but in this video I'll be focusing only on the use of prisms. So in terms of the procedure of how we go about mapping the suppression scotoma, firstly you will have undertaken an ocular motility examination, and the key assessments we need as we move forward with mapping the suppression is the cover test and the measurement of the deviation. So you will have done that, and then you progress to mapping the suppression scotoma. And as we see here, you place a prism before one of the eyes, and it will be the deviating eye. And you start with the smallest prism and progressively move your way through the prism bar. And what you're asking the patient is to report when they have diplopia, when they first appreciate diplopia. And in terms of interpretation, the periods of time or the prisms in which there is single vision indicates that we're within the suppression scotoma. And the moment she has diplopia, so if she has diplopia here, for instance, it's at this point that we've come out of the suppression scotoma. So what we record is either the prism bars in which we have single vision or the last prism bar in which single vision was reported. So let's have a look at this using a projection diagram. So here we have a patient with a esotropia, and we have a suppression scotoma from fovea to CIP. Now, if we put a base out prism before this eye, recall that this will move the image towards the base, and so we're going to move temporally on the retina. And as we progressively move towards the fovea, the patient should be reporting single vision because we're within the suppression scotoma. Once we come out of the suppression scotoma, the patient will report diplopia. So if this, say for instance, was 20 diopter ET, then once we get past the 20 diopters, so on the prism bar the next one is 25, the patient will report diplopia. Now we can repeat this by putting a base in prism now. And by putting a base in prism, we're going to move now nasally. And in this instance, the patient would report immediately diplopia with a base in prism because there is no suppression scotoma here. So we use base out and base in to map the horizontal suppression scotoma. And we can use a base up and base down if we're trying to map a vertical deviation. Okay, let's have a look at an example of a patient. So we have in this instance a left exotropia, and I've depicted that on a projection diagram here with the CIP on temporal retina. And the prism cover test has indicated we have a 20 diopter exotropia. So again, that's telling us the distance between CIP and fovea is 20 diopters. And what we have reported here is that we have single from 0 to 45 diopters base in. Single meaning we're within the suppression scotoma up to 45 diopters base in. So if we put a base in prism here, we know that it's taken us 20 diopters to get to fovea. So the remainder of the prism bar is in nasal retina, or pushing the image into nasal retina. So what that's telling us is that we've got a suppression scotoma that extends from temporal to nasal retina. If we put a base in, there's no, so if we put a base out prism, there's diplopia immediately, which is telling us we do not have any diplopia on or beyond the CIP. So if we have a look at that suppression scotoma, this is 20 diopters worth here, and the remainder 25 diopters is along here. So what we know here is that this patient is at low risk of post-op diplopia, because the surgeon can overcorrect, and if they overcorrect and they become an esotropia, they will not experience diplopia because they have a suppression scotoma along the nasal retina. Also, if they undercorrected, again, there'd be no diplopia postoperatively because there is a suppression scotoma from CIP to fovea. variation of this. I've just given same sort of patient but changed where the single vision is. And in this instance, I've indicated only goes up to 10 diopters base in, and then beyond that we have single vision. So what that would mean is that when we put the base in prism, only 10 diopters worth is single, and the remainder is diplopia. If we put a base out prism, there's diplopia on temporal retina beyond CIP. But for us, if we're going to correct this patient surgically, or if we were to give the surgeon an opinion about whether surgery would produce post-op diplopia, well, what we know is that we've got a short suppression scotoma, and that if the surgeon tried to fully correct, there'd be diplopia. If they overcorrected, there'd be diplopia, and even an undercorrection would cause diplopia because the suppression scotoma is not going all the way to the fovea. So that's an example where we would be indicating that there's a risk of post-op diplopia. And finally, I want to bring your attention to how we use prisms to alleviate diplopia in patients who do not have the potential for BSV but do have a suppression scotoma. So the example I have here is of a patient with an XT. Here we have the CIP on temporal retina, and the patient is experiencing cross diplopia. Let's say they have a history of anisotropia, and we can see that with the suppression scotoma on nasal retina. They've had surgery, they've been overcorrected to be an exotropia, and now they've got this double vision. How can we give this patient single vision? Well, they might have surgery again, but in the meantime, we can give this patient prisms. What sort of prism? Base in. We want to move the image from CIP towards the suppression scotoma. And once we find the prism that gets the image into the suppression scotoma, the patient will have single vision. The diplopia will be alleviated. So when we prescribe prisms, we give the least amount of prism that gives the patient single vision. And whilst we've been talking about mapping suppression scotoma, it's a useful way to understand the prism subjective and how we go about prescribing prisms in these patients.